Now, okay, so hey everyone, we're Group 5. Today we're going to be talking to you about creative government. We're going over the definition, its policy, and management implications. So just a quick little overview of what we're doing and what we're going to cover. We're going to cover the problem or research question we worked on, the definitions, the conceptual basis, the operational basis, and the conclusion. So overall today we're going to be talking about creative governments. The next slide, please. And we're going to talk about creative governance. And in order to understand this, one must break it down into two words. The terms creative and governance seem to somewhat contradict each other, but when we view them correctly, a powerful combination creates a strong outcome. So creativity is obviously synonymous with imagination, ingenuity, innovation, invention, and originality. Governance is more complex and synonymous with authority, decision-making, and accountability. So creative governance is a multi-form concept with infinite boundaries and limitless restrictions. And just like the definition of public administration, there's multiple levels of this definition. So it's pretty much the breakdown of the barriers in the public and private government through critical thinking skills and open minds. Basically, it's everything the government can do to be successful through innovation, seen in policies, global relations, collaborations, technology, and joint mission-driven projects between the public and private sectors.
So when our team came to looking into how to research this, we focused very heavily on real-world instances of creative governance. By that, we looked at the impact that these creative governance actions had on the world around them. How did this impact the community? And in the instance of successful cases, how has that been looked at moving forward as a way for other places to use these as examples? We also dug a little bit into systems theory and how that can have an impact on the entire view of creative governance, and how these actions can initially be looked at and looking down the road, how that's going to have an impact on the community. One of the first ones first instances of creative governance involve the internet. I'll get to that here in just a moment. But first, we need to knock out the perceptions of government across the board. People look at government, they immediately hear or see slow-moving organization. It's going to take its time. There's a lot of red tape that you have to get through. It's going to take a while for anything to get through. It's not necessarily the most creative institution that we have, at least when we perceive government. It's also real conservative to change, and when it does change, it just doesn't seem like it changes enough. Changes within government are more the result of an outside force forcing government to change rather than government changing of its own free will. Now, time to break down some of those perceptions and ill-conceived perceptions at that. Government's actually been responsible for some of the very products we use on a day-to-day basis. Things like the internet. That was a government creation to start things off. It's able to not only accomplish innovation through creation, but also to accomplish innovation through the propelling of the private sector. Government policies create an atmosphere in which the private sector can thrive. Also, government sometimes develops a technology that the private sector is able to grab, utilize, expand on, and make it into something that we use on an everyday basis. I've mentioned the internet. One of those was something called ARPANET. Now, this was created in the early 60s. It's not the internet that we use every day today, but it was made in the 60s and used heavily by the U.S. military. This was a result of the space race, actually. Sputnik went up. Americans got freaked out because all of a sudden the Soviet Union had accomplished something that the U.S. had not yet. And we needed a way to effectively communicate throughout a very large organization such as the U.S. military. This eventually spilled out into the private sector and was capitalized and taken hold of and turned into the internet that we know today. That internet really started up in the early 90s. But it was through innovations in the private sector that ARPANET was able to be fully realized and in a form that we interact with on a daily basis. Another innovation for creative governance is through economic policy. Now, this is not necessarily a situation where the government is creating something and then a private sector company takes this out and then utilizes it. In this instance, this is the government steering the private sector in a way to better set up the private sector for success. So what we looked at, the case study we looked at for this was through Japan. This was their Ministry of International Trade and Industry created this little bit of economic policy, and it involved, it wasn't the creation of a new product per se, but it really helped steer the businesses within or organizations within Japan to by steering Japanese firms into new international markets. Now they call this picking winners. That's the tactic that they use. And the advantage to this is you're able to set up Japanese markets, or in general, economic market in general. So therefore, the businesses are able to profit off of that. Something more local, not such a broad scale, would be what we saw in Columbia, South Carolina. And with this, the issue that they saw was a rising crime rate in kind of dilapidated neighborhoods, and they needed to find a way to try and break down and stop this rising crime rate. In order to do that, they could just do what would be a more traditionalist government action, and that would be, well, let's just put more patrol over these areas, but that also is going to remove police officers from areas that also are dealing with crime. So their creative solution to this was the development of the homeowner loan program. Through this program, police officers were able to buy subsidized housing through the local government, and this housing was located within these troubled neighborhoods. The reason this worked so well is because it introduced police officers to these affected areas. You now have implemented a police presence without actually having to shift an entire patrol over into the area. These homes also tended to be rehabbed above city standards, and the result of this was a drop in the rate of crime in these areas, and you were able to accomplish that without shifting patrols across the board. The findings with this are that no matter the size of government, local, state, national, you are able to perform creative governance through multiple institutions in order to succeed in having a way of addressing a problem that's not necessarily of the traditionalist point of view. The difference that makes is it's able to, in some instances, save money. You're able to drive economies. You're able to create even a brand new industry in the instance of internet. So it's just a way of creative governance being able to push the economy, push a certain issue, and find a solution to it without necessarily going through all the bureaucratic steps or relying on traditionalist values that government has tended to fall back on in the past.
So we talked about just now this conceptual basis of the creative government, but what about the operational basis? There's several examples of creativity in governance that are being used today to address these complex issues, and today we'll just go over a few. There's a study about global trends in 2018, which was presented at the World Summit and provided a lot of examples of creative government. These examples that they gave were pivotal in creating to the overall nature of creative governance. The studies outlined several critical global issues that require governments to be innovative in addressing their approach to problems worldwide. The study also identified a multitude of different issues that particularly focus on vulnerable populations. So when we think of the vulnerable populations, we're talking about the homeless. Pretty much my button just scrolled all the way down. Bear with me. Okay, so the homeless is a big government issue that has studied multiple times, and because homelessness is a global issue, the United Nations has even declared it as a human rights crisis. In the U.S., homelessness can be upwards to about $7,000 per month when taking into account all public resources that it takes to address it. The traditional approach from governments have been only from a policy ordinance approach, which inadvertently added to the difficult living environment for these homeless. And some say this would also be kind of punitive. However, there have been some successful approaches where other governing bodies could also mirror these programs. Housing First was another program which was developed in Finland and attempted to solve issues of homelessness after taking care of the housing issue. So this program provided subsidized housing to the whole, and it also followed up with targeted services. A traditional approach would be something as resolving the issues that contribute to the homelessness in the first place, such as substance abuse or mental health. Now, this approach, it helped remove the stigma for the individuals and allowed the individual to get constant care rather than just falling off the grid and not following up with these sensitive populations. So multiple studies also gave ample evidence from many countries that showed that it was way more cost effective to end homelessness rather than try to manage it. So how did they become successful operationally? Aside from funding the theory, the government of Finland partnered with local organizations and these great community members to support these individuals. A great example of creative governance in this was utilizing the input from everyone, creating a maximum innovation and success through teamwork instead of inclusion. The concept is also behind the Ask for Welfare Lab, which is a service delivery model that was centered around a citizen in which all relevant municipal services together with external partners invest jointly in a person's welfare. So we talked about the vulnerable populations topics in the government, but system approaches is another area where governments have to be responsive, and innovative. This approach identifies a real purpose behind the change process and the design innovations that work in specific contexts. By doing this, it allows innovation to create jobs, grow the local economy, boost global competitiveness. And a big example would be in San Antonio, in our very own backyard, 2013, there were the mayor, along with major stakeholders of the community, they championed a ballot that would provide millions of dollars of tax revenue to pre-K education. This was meant not to only boost the short-term and long-term education, but also to develop a more skilled and educated workforce that would benefit the San Antonio community for a long time. So this program encompassed a system that allowed every type of background to receive education, and the sales tax was only increased about 1/8 of a cent, which amounted to about $35 million per year. So the research based off this, what was the big? It stated that overall, cognitively and mathematically, these students, these kids, would go above the national average for education. So they're really prepared. Another innovative economic approach in economic growth in building skilled workforce was within Kansas. This is another scenario in regards to economics. So the Senate Bill 155 in 2012 established incentives for students to enroll in technical skill programs for college. This bill provided tuition reimbursement certifications for high demand fields in Kansas. The research also was tremendous and yielded enormous benefits for future workforce of Kansas and skilled labor, along with overall education, providing opportunities for low-income populations. So the findings were successful, and it became a standing recommendation for policymakers and education leaders nationwide to invest heavily in human capital in order to stimulate the economy, create jobs, and provide an overall strong government competitiveness presence. So to conclude and summarize, creative governance overall must be an abstract thought. Let's think of it. Think of creativity as a spark, which is the initial catalyst that creates like a burn. The fuel is the governing body controlling the burn. When improperly coupled with, there will be no outcome or even damage or destruction for citizens. So when you couple it properly with the two accepting elements, the outcome is strong and controlled. It's a strong and controlled burn that provides warmth and success for citizens. Only an acceptance will feel governments and creative elements be viable. Creative governance is the breaking down of restrictive limitations, boundaries through applications, critical thinking, open-mindedness, collaboration, and public entities. This breakdown leads to strong, successful government systems. Overall, there's a popular shift in favor of creative governments. Creative minds are awakening to the idea governments can and should be innovated. Although not widely publicized, accolades rarely distributed, the trajectory is positive and powerful, eliminating any hindrance of grossing in the past. Yeah, I gotta go over that a little bit more to make it less choppy. But yeah, we're at 16:14.